one of my favorite things about teaching watercolor online is that occasionally I'm given products to review, and I try to only review products I know I'm actually going to enjoy and use, because I don't want to waste anyone's time, really. Recently I was given an assortment of brushes to try from Princeton Brush Company, and they are also a prized sponsor of my Watercolor Summer Challenge, which you can check out at watercolorsummerchallenge.com. Princeton Brushes, I've been aware of them for quite a while, and they have a variety of series. Most companies do, and that means that there's really a brush style and size and quality to suit any budget and painting style, which I really like. I've used primarily the Neptune brushes, which I have here. These are actually from my own personal collection. I just had to buy this number 4 quill brush because of the gorgeous wire around the ferrule. I love those kind of details, and these have really, I like the wooden handles as well. They just give it a little bit more of a high-end feel than the ones with the plastic handles, although they carry those as well. This is the series 4950R. These are the Neptune series. This one is 4050R. And these here are the Velvetouch, and all of these are synthetic brushes. And synthetic brushes, a lot of times they get maybe a bad rap because they don't have the cachet or the luxury impression as a sable brush. But these days, synthetic brushes really do hold their own in competition against a sable brush. And a few different reasons for that is, for one, people are more concerned now about using products that don't have animal byproducts involved. So a synthetic brush, isn't using actual sable hair. The other issue is there are import restrictions, and sometimes sable brushes can be hard to get just because it's harder to ship them across from country to country. And finally, the synthetics just get better and better all the time. Used to be a synthetic brush was very stiff, very snappy, whereas a sable brush would be a lot softer. And nowadays you can get some very soft synthetics and synthetic blends that rival anything that you'd find in a sable brush. So today I'm just going to use the Princeton Velvetouch. They're my newest brush here. And they're the ones that I just recently received from Princeton to try. And one reason they send them to me is I told them that I like a brush with longer bristles. And so this is a number 12 long round, and we have a number 4 long round, which I might use for tiny details. But I think most of what I want to do today I can do with this long round number 12 brush. And the paper I'm using today is made by Hanamula. This is their Turner line. It's a 140-pound cold press or matte finish. And I'm trying some new paint colors as well. And I'm going to start by just painting. We've been out in the mountains. We've been out in the mountains quite a lot recently, and I've just been loving the beautiful scenery out there. So we're going to paint something kind of inspired by my recent trips to the mountains. I'm going to start with some cobalt teal and cinereous blue. And you can see I've started with dry paper. That's most of the time I prefer to start painting on dry paper. I get some control about where the color flows. You can see I'm using lots of water, so the color immediately starts to spread, and yet it doesn't bleed onto the dry paper. So I have a little bit of control and a little bit of fluidity at the same time, which is why I like to paint on dry paper. Now the mountains we've been visiting are kind of rounded. Here in the northern Rockies, they don't get as craggy as they do further south. They're not nearly as dramatic, but they are quite beautiful and much more solitary. And we love the fact that we can go out to the mountains and not see another person just by driving for a couple of hours from home. So now we've got some mountains. And I'm not really sure what that purple color was. It was just a little bit of palette dirt. And we're going to add a little bit of green as well, because we tend to see some trees on these lower mountains. This is actually a new color, zoisite, and it's kind of a grayish green. And I like that it has this real movement. When I touch it onto wet paper, it immediately wants to start spreading. And then as we come down towards the landscape, we might see some evergreen trees. So let's put some in. And this is too bright, actually. I need something a little murkier, so we'll add a little bit of that violet to it. And I'm just going to pull down with my brush to get those trees positioned. So I went back to my palette dirt because I didn't like that bright green I started with, and I can mix a little bit of dirty paint mixture from my palette. I don't ever clean my palette because you get your best neutrals from a dirty palette. And then right in the middle here, I'm going to create a little path. Looking for a good color for my path. So there's going to be a path there. And right now seems like a good time to tilt my board, so I let gravity help me out, keeping things from running up into my sky. Everything will kind of move downward, and that's one reason I like to start at the top of a landscape painting and move downward. You have a little bit more control of what happens on your paper. I want that feeling of spiky palm tree or pine trees, not palm trees, but I also want everything to kind of blend softly together in this first layer. A lot of times artists will paint everything kind of separate in these early stages. They'll paint one area, they'll let it dry, and then they'll come back and paint the next area. The problem with that is when you do that, you end up with hard edges between all your different elements in your painting. And those hard edges are really hard to layer over, pardon the pun. So rather than creating hard edges in those first layers that you can't cover up, create fewer hard layers by creating a very soft underpainting. It establishes the location of everything in your painting, but it gives you also some freedom to add further detail, darker values in the successive layers. Now, one thing that we see a lot of in the landscape in the mountains is wildflowers. So we're going to put some wildflowers in. We usually have some peach and orange colored ones. In fact, I picked a whole rainbow of wildflowers, so I can add some pink. And, oops, I keep doing that. And I want to add some blue as well. And I might leave a few little white spaces for white flowers. And I'm just letting everything run together softly rather than trying to paint separate flowers. I like to think of this as a distant view. So in the first layer of your painting, it's like you're standing off at a distance and you're just getting the impression of a mass of objects. You're not seeing the individual items. And so you get to have that looseness where everything flows together. And then as we continue the painting, that's when we start to add those details that will bring out the focal point in your scene. And you get to see in these early stages how everything works together kind of as a whole. Okay, so that's really a very promising first layer. And I've done it all with my number 12 long round from Princeton. And this Velvetouch brush has a little more stiffness. It's got that synthetic feel where it's just a little bit more kind of snappy in its feel on the paper. and yet I've been able to get a variety of lines. I've created some wide shapes with the side of my brush and lots of really beautiful fine lines with the point. And I tend to use any of my brushes. I will use as long as that point is nice and sharp here. I'll keep using it until that point is rounded down and has a more worn feel. This Princeton 4950 is one of my older brushes, and you can see the tip isn't nearly as pointy on the end anymore, although I think I can still get some use out of that one. Once this has dried, we'll go in. We're going to be using the same brush, and we'll put some more details into this quick little mountain scene. You notice I haven't used a reference photo here. I'm painting this whole thing based on my memories of our recent hiking trip. It works well to paint your memories because then you're painting what stands out to you about the scene. So you might not have everything positioned completely accurately, but you're going to be able to paint what you remember without getting bogged down in tiny details that don't really matter. So I like to take time to paint things that I remember without using a reference photo, although a reference photo can be really useful as well. It's just a trick. The trick is in knowing when to set it aside and work based on what you want to emphasize as your focal point in the scene. My first layer has dried, and I want to continue by adding some detail. Everything's kind of equal in this scene, so we need some contrasts and we need some detail to make our painting come to life. And I want to just talk about brushes a little bit as I work here. And one thing I want to say is that there is no magic brush that's going to make your painting come to life. It's really, the magic is in the hands of the user, and that's one reason you'll see so many different artists using so many different brushes. We all have our own preferences, and we try to choose a brush that suits our working style, but we also know how to make a brush work for us, even if it's not quite the perfect brush. And so you'd be better, rather than trying to source just that exact perfect brush that's going to create magic for you, you're much better off spending time learning brush handling techniques, learning how to work with a light touch, learning how to use the sides and tip of your brush to create different effects. And as you work on those techniques and build your skills in brush handling, it will be a lot easier for you to get that kind of effortless look that often I think people attribute to having the right brush more than to the skill of the user. And a lot of these brush strokes you see me making are movements I've made thousands of times over the course of my painting career. I've developed, a signature brush style, movements that I like that work for the kind of style I want to express. And so when it looks like this brush is just doing magical things, well, a brush with a really nice fine point like this Princeton number 12 long round will create these beautiful lines, as well as filling an area quickly using the side of my brush. And you can see how effectively that works. And but you need to have some skill in using in brush work before you're able to create those marks. Spending lots of time using your brush is going to be the best way to achieve that. So I've livened up the foreground of my painting here, and I'm liking having a little more vibrance there. I've pulled down the Zoisite Genuine that I used up here in the shadows down into this part of the scene, so it's going to be moving up through the painting. I'm almost wondering if I should touch a little bit. Well, I'm going to wait and think about it. I'd like to connect this area to this area, so I'm trying to figure out how I want to do that. And I think I'll move into my tree area, which I really wanted to have my darkest values in this area. And painting trees, these are going to be evergreen trees in the forest, alpine forest here. So I need some interesting greens, and I'm going to choose a cool green. So I've mixed up some Paraline green, a little bit of phthalo turquoise, and let's see, I'm not really sure how I want to paint my evergreen trees. Generally they're kind of spiky and pointy at the top, and here they're forests, so they're clustered together. So I can use the side of my brush pulling down to create the the mass of trees and then pulling up from here to create the points, but I'm still feeling like I need to do something more. And I'm actually going to fill in some of those tree trunks as well, just pulling right down. And I'm not liking these points, they look too fussy to me, so I'm going to just try to fix that a little bit. And this brush wants to, because it's a long round, it's a little harder to control. So my little points that I'm pulling up tend to want to curve. And I like unpredictability, except when I don't like it. Maybe if I go the opposite way, I've been pulling up, so if I just press down, I'll get a point widening fairly quickly. Maybe that'll do more of what I want it to do. I want to simplify my tree shapes rather than have them be really detailed. So I'm just looking for the best way to do that. And that's a little better. It's still not quite what I wanted, but that just means it's something I need to work on a little bit more. And I'm adding some green gold. And this will give me the sense of distance in my trees, having some of that green gold in the foreground. I placed it after, so it kind of pushes against the darker green in behind. And it gives you a different effect than putting the dark over top of the light. And I'm not sure if I want to carry that all the way across or not. Thinking decisions. And I'm going to soften that a little bit because it looks too crisp. I'm going to fade that right across here. This softening out will give me space to decide how I want to treat the break in the trees here, and if I want to have a break there at all. And more trees here. Remember to vary your height of your little points. They look like little gnome hats, actually. And it's not a very accurate representation of what an evergreen tree is going to look like, but I'm simplifying in order to give an impression of a scene rather than painting every detail like a photograph. Remember that cameras have this thing that they do where your camera doesn't differentiate. It doesn't choose to emphasize some areas and minimize others. It just records what is visible in the lens, and everything gets an equal treatment. Whereas with painting, we get to decide how we want our viewer to move through the scene, what we want them to remember, and so we get this freedom to exaggerate some areas, to minimize others, and that gives us a painting that will have more impact, and it makes a statement and tells a story. And it tells you something about the artist as well. When we look at a photograph, it doesn't tell us anything. We don't get a sense of the camera's personality. There's no personality there. It's just doing its job of recording mechanically. Whereas as an artist, I get to have my say in what I paint and how I paint it. And you can tell a lot about an artist by how they paint a scene. People know I love the region I live in because of my commitment to painting it and the way I paint it. Now, I don't want to add too much detail to my mountains, but I wanted to just maybe add a little bit of line to define some areas that kind of faded up into the sky. And I'm going to try not to touch my trees right now because I don't want everything to bleed. So I don't need a huge arsenal of brushes in order to create a scene in watercolor. And I love the fact that with a nice big round brush, and you want it to be a larger brush so that you can fill those large areas quickly, I love that I can have so much versatility. I've created these thinner lines. I've filled in large areas and sections of my painting. I've used the side and tip of my brush in order to create all these different shapes. And with the Princeton brushes, I'm just going to try a little spatter here, and might be a good idea to cover. And I always have a scrap of paper towel lying around. I'm just going to cover that area so I can spatter down below here. And that might look a little bit like flower blossoms. And I'm going to lighten and blot some of the ones that kind of migrated upwards. So they're still there, but they're paler. And I think I'll add some spatter with some blue as well. Covering again. And I actually like to spatter when part of my painting, part of the area I'm spattering on is still damp, because then you get some areas that are nice and crisp and some where the color will bleed, and it's really bleeding in the center here. There's a lot of moisture in this area, and whereas it's crisper over along the sides. I'm going to add some darks, I think, right in here, and the reason for that is I feel like there's this big open space in my scene that kind of feels empty, and I think my question is, do I add it back here or do I add it in the foreground here? And there's, you know, I get to decide. I'm the artist. I'm wondering actually about going in here with a little bit of detail. And it's damp still too, so that using the fine tip of my brush, painting a little bit of grass and foliage might just connect this middle section to the rest of the painting. And it's an experiment, I'm trying. Not sure if it will be the better choice. And I love working out a painting by trying it out in different ways. If this version doesn't work, it won't take me a really long time to try another way of expressing the scene, another aspect that might suit better. And just taper off the line right there. I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'm not sure, I won't want to go back in and maybe darken up my darkest values, tweak and experiment a little bit more. And the risk, of course, with continuing, and the reason I'm stopping now, is that a watercolor artist generally has this weakness where we overwork our subject. And knowing that as a watercolor artist, I have a tendency to overwork, to put in more detail than is necessary, to create muddy layers rather than holding back and keeping things simple and clean. Knowing that means that I can take a break, frequent breaks, pull myself back from making that mistake and going too deep into my painting. With a little bit of perspective and a little bit of time, I can evaluate better what needs to happen next in my painting, or if I can actually call it completed. Regarding the Princeton brushes, and today this was the Princeton Velvetouch number 12 long round. Like I said, I like a brush with long bristles because I have a little bit of that whippiness to it where there's some unpredictability. You can create some really beautiful line with a big, very finely pointed brush. And I also love that I can fill a large area quickly. And I want to emphasize this because I think I think often beginning painters, we have a tendency to work with brushes that are too small. And when I'm painting a painting of this size, about 9 by 12, I like using a brush that's at least a number 12. And one of the reasons for that is when you're working with a smaller brush, this is a number 8 round, when you're working with a smaller brush like this, it's going to take you longer to fill a large area of your painting, but your brush strokes are also going to be more fussy. It's going to take more brush strokes to create, the trees, for example. And anytime we are working with these fussy little strokes, it tends to make our painting look quite busy. And we also kind of get, how do I say it, kind of mechanical about filling in that area. So there's all these rhythmic brush strokes rather than this one clean, full line that you can create with this one, with the larger brush. This video demonstration and review of Princeton Artist Brushes is a part of my Watercolor Summer Challenge. All through August, I'm giving away some great watercolor products to participants in my weekly challenges. There's also a great big grand prize worth over $800. You're going to want to check it out at watercolorsummerchallenge.com. If you enjoyed this landscape lesson, you might enjoy one of my online courses focused on painting landscapes. You can check out all my courses online at learn.angelafair.com. I give lifetime access. You can watch the video lessons anytime, as many times as you like. And there's a student gallery where I offer critiques and coaching to help you bring your paintings to the next level and grow your watercolor skills while still loving your watercolor journey. Learning watercolor doesn't have to feel like a struggle. We can love the journey